We're on to our next unit. We'll jump into the 1960s and 1970s with a big focus on the Vietnam War and then the Watergate scandal. So right here up front, I'll do a little PowerPoint preview of the unit. You'll do the notes on your own. This week, there'll be 4 assignments that will be due Friday by midnight, along with a couple days of notes, a little bit more note-taking in this unit. So I'll be collecting the notes weekly along with your homework. But right now, here's a little preview of the unit. Let's jump right into our unit preview. The next 3 weeks, we'll be covering the 60s and 70s, the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal. There'll be a little bit of overlap from the Civil Rights Unit. We'll see in one of the John Green Crash Course videos a little bit more about the civil rights movement of the 1960s. But our main focus really in this unit will be the Vietnam War. This unit, a little bit more note intensive. You'll do a couple days of notes this week and a couple days next week. Again, this is not notes here, just a little preview of the unit. You'll be doing the notes on your own. But the Vietnam War involved jungle warfare. We had to institute the draft. The Gulf of Tonkin incident started the war, and it was revealed many years later that that event was greatly exaggerated so that LBJ, our president, could go to Congress to ask for a declaration of war. It was really a negative war as far as Americans viewed the war. I remember, being a teenager during the Vietnam War and even a little bit younger when the war started, and seeing the peace marches in Berkeley and San Francisco when we would visit my relatives. And, the neighbors down the street got drafted. I got a draft card number when I was a junior in high school. It was an interesting time, very volatile time in American history, and you'll be doing some notes over the next few days. 1968, a key year in U.S. history. The Tet Offensive in Vietnam occurred. It was a surprise attack by the North Vietnamese forces, the Viet Cong, attacking the U.S. forces. There were images that came into American living rooms of the Viet Cong on the grounds of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. It kind of stunned the American public, and it led to a lot of protest movement and people wondering, how we were doing in the war there. We had been told we were winning, and then these images came from the Tet Offensive that suggested otherwise, and it led to the nickname of the Vietnam War. For some called it the living room war, because we saw these images at home. Because of the Tet Offensive, LBJ decided not to run again for office. In 1968 was also the assassination of Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy got taken down. Some people expected that he might be the next president, and when Kennedy went out, Nixon ended up winning the 1968 presidential election. We have the women's rights movement, which takes place in the early 70s. So we have the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, and then the women's lib movement of the 1970s. My mom was a 1970s hippie, and she was a big part of this movement. Then we have the hippie movement, which started, its birthplace was here in San Francisco at the corner of Haight and Ashbury. I'm sure some of you have visited the Haight. It still is a kind of a haven for a lot of younger people to hang out. But in my day, I remember going to see these hippies. I mentioned my uncle lived in San Francisco, right near Haight and Ashbury, and my mom would always circle us around the block so I could get a look at the hippies. It was kind of like a spectacle to see all the hippies out. But this was part of the counterculture movement that came from the Vietnam War. And we had a course at Kent State University in Ohio, 4 college students gunned down by the National Guard that led to much negative publicity. Then we have the Watergate scandal at the tail end, or I guess about midway through Nixon's second term. This hit the headlines. Nixon eventually resigned. It was revealed that the Republicans were spying on the Democrats at the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel, and it was all connected back to President Nixon. Nixon denied for many months, but eventually this was his undoing and led to his resignation. It brought us Gerald Ford, who got sworn in as the new president. And eventually, because the Republicans kind of fell out of favor, Jimmy Carter in 1976 came in and won the election. And, you know, the power at the top kind of changed. The Republicans, the conservative movement had led to two somewhat convincing wins for Nixon, but that all changed with the Watergate scandal, and we'll be talking about that as we maneuver through this unit. Stay on top of the workload. Make sure you get those assignments turned in by this Friday at midnight. This unit will cover the next 3 weeks. At the end of the unit, there will be a writing assignment, as I've done for assessment, and then we'll end the school year by taking a look at the 80s and the 1990s. Have a great week, everybody.